Welcome to the
Alrighty.
Founders Odyssey podcast, where we educate, inspire, and create a supportive community for our fellow founders. Today, we are joined by Joe May. Joe is a multipreneur, investor, attorney by trade, ambitious marketing talent, video marketing expert, and a detail-oriented mastermind. With these specific skill sets, he, in collaboration with his team, has created and scaled their marketing company creatively to assist in their clients, receiving over 300 million plus in revenue, and have developed an investment arm to assist in funding different companies they believe have significant growth potential. Throughout his many years of experience growing, scaling, consulting, developing systems, and taking action to build companies, Joe has cemented himself as a go-to entrepreneur in the US market. Let's welcome Joe to part one of our Founders Odyssey podcast interview. Welcome, Joe.
Cool. Thanks for having me, Nathan.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about where you're at right now and what got you into the game of entrepreneurship and what propels you forward.
So I got into entrepreneurship kind of backwards. I went to law school. I was an attorney for a couple of years, hated it. And then I got on at a startup called Freshly Picked and was running their operations and doing the in-house counsel, and just never looked back. From there, I started my own company, and then I joined creatively as a partner about a year and a half ago.
So starting your own company, you must have been inspired by somebody in your life or some mentor of some sort. That's what typically happens with entrepreneurs, but what really sparked you to the next level to start your own thing?
Good question. I describe it as when I started working for the startup, the first one I went to, it was like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. And it was just, that was it. I was in, once I came with an idea, it was like, I just kind of knew that's what I was doing. It wasn't like trying to emulate anyone. It was just like, this is what I was put on the earth to do. Basically, it just kind of was like, it was such a good fit for my personality, the way I thought about things, that I was just in.
So let's share with the audience a little bit about your personality and about really what's your makeup, because a lot of founders out there have different backgrounds, right? Different personalities. So what do you think your personality is, and how did you really define exactly what your personality is?
That's a good question. I don't know if, for me, the way I just, I'm very good at just like taking ideas and running with them and not needing a lot of direction. And just kind of getting into entrepreneurship really connected with that, I guess, and being able to focus on that. And I don't know, that's a good question. I mean, well, this is the way I think, and you've done a lot of entrepreneurship stuff, and I think this will connect with you. When you hear an idea, like a really good idea that somebody else came up with, rather than thinking of like, oh, that's a lot of risk, it's more of like, oh, that was genius. Or even when you think of an idea, like, I'm going to go launch this idea, you don't think of any of the risk, like, what if I fail? Your only risk is, what if I'm not first? And I think, like, if that's how you think about stuff, you're probably an entrepreneur. If you think about it and you're like, wow, that's a lot of risk, I don't want to take the risk, it's probably not for you. I don't know.
Yeah,
that's kind of a roundabout way of saying it.
I'm curious, do you have almost a systematic approach to really vetting ideas? Because of course, now that you've helped, scale companies and built companies yourself, do you have any way that you look at startups as well as your own companies and the ideas that are constantly flowing through your day to day?
So we have a system here that we've developed where we call our 5Ds, and it's how we evaluate any if we're going to work with a company or if we're going to invest in a company. It comes back to these kind of 5Ds, and the first one is, how disruptive is your idea? Is it is it something that's just moderately more disruptive, or does it completely change the nature of what you're doing, of the industry? Is it something that's so much better that customers will actually use it? Because I think there's a lot of like minor disruption that doesn't really pull in customers. There's not a real reason for a customer to use that. The second thing is, how big is the idea? We look at how democratic an idea is. Can you do all 300 million Americans need it? Or is it only like 50,000 people? Is the cost, or the, only applies to people who like to golf left-handed, or, it's like, how big is your market? And for us, we want to go after massive markets. We want to go after 300 million people, 150 million people, because it's so much easier to sell something that 150 million people need than 10 million. The third thing we look at is how demonstrable, how easy is it to show how much better the product is. Can people see it and get it immediately? Is there like just an immediate like snap? The fourth thing we look is how deliverable the product is. How easy is it to get to the consumer? And that can be either an online, or if you have a massive distribution network of sellers across the country, are you in big wholesale? Like, how easy is it to get to that point where they see the product, want the product, and buy the product? And then the last thing is, well, the last D is like a marketing thing where you have to have dollars for distribution, because you have to be able to spend to get the word out. And so is it profitable to spend to get the word out for that product? So there's some price point factors there too.
What are you seeing is one of the biggest downfalls of founders that start companies that haven't properly allocated either the funding or really their marketing and distribution plan? Because of course you're a marketer, right? And you've used your team to help companies. So where's the downfall?
I think a lot of the downfall is the lack of, so kind of stepping back, I think like what makes an entrepreneur successful versus what makes them not successful is their mindset. As dumb as that sounds, I think there's like a whole kind of manifest destiny side to it, where if you're like, I'm going to be successful, you will break through whatever barriers. You'll find ways to make that work. You just will. You'll beat anything. You won't stop fighting until you get there. And I think that is like the key for me, is like, does somebody have kind of that like feeling where they're like, it doesn't matter what happens, this is going to work? And not like an unrealistic, I mean, at some point, the ships are burned, you have no money, you've been beaten up bad enough that it's like, all right, let's limp home. But it's really like, when you have an idea, like, if your failure is based like, oh, we couldn't figure out how to market it, then you didn't really like believe in the product. Because like that all comes from the founder and the entrepreneur. All that energy that started around a brand comes from the entrepreneur. But on marketing, on that side of things, it's very fascinating to us. Is we'll talk to somebody who's like, oh, I want to get to 20 million in revenue. It's like, great, you're gonna have to spend $5 million to get there. And they're just like, oh, I can't spend that much money. It's like, well, then you're not gonna get to 20 million in revenue. Because if nobody knows who your product is, they don't know how it works, they don't care. And the only way to get people to care is to get their eyeballs. And you have to spend money to do that, whether you're paying influencers, Facebook, TikTok, using ad platforms, however you're doing it, you have to get the word out, and it costs money, and it costs capital, human capital, energy. And if you either can do that or you can't at the end of the day.
Talk about your mindset and some of the things that you do maybe on a weekly or a monthly basis to make sure that you're refreshed and you're focused on getting back in the game, regardless of what happens throughout your week, throughout your month. Everybody
Yeah.
has their own way. How do you do that? But then also, how would you suggest other people out there to do that?
So I have a pretty strict morning routine. I'm a big time morning person. That, my personality. I try to get up between 5 and 5:30 every morning. And the first like 10 to 20 minutes I meditate, and then I have a journal writing, like, just let me just empty everything that's in my brain, type of stuff. And then I read. I mean, I personally read religious text in the morning. That's for me. But it's like it's a lot of just like finding what matters to you in that first hour and what keeps you going. And I mean, for me, like I've had days where it's just a terrible day, and I'll sit down in my office and I'll be like, I just have to get to tomorrow morning, because I know that if I can get up early, meditate, do my journal writing, and then kind of have like a reading where I like a very introspective, honest, hour with myself, and then I go exercise for a half an hour to an hour. That to me, I it builds up so much momentum that no matter what I'm going through, no matter how terrible everything is, that hour like lifts me up. It gives like I mean, I've gone through some pretty terrible stuff for my own company in the last couple of years, litigation, facing down bankruptcy and just crappy, terrible situations by taking risks. And that morning became like the biggest part of my day. I would look forward to that hour with myself, quiet, in a quiet house in the morning, and just know that like if I could get there, I can keep going.
Take us through a small little window there with the mindset that you went through and that you had through almost facing bankruptcy or facing being a bankruptcy for that matter. And then, because there's levels of emotion that one goes
Mhm.
through, right? So take us through those levels of emotion and then how you built yourself back up. Because many founders out there,
Yeah.
they're either starting their company, they're running their company, or they've reached the precipice of maintenance, right? So let's walk us through that emotion.
That's interesting. So I think the biggest thing, at least for me, was like fear of failure. Um, I think most entrepreneurs I know have a chip on their shoulder, or have um, like people don't believe in me type of mentality. Like people doubt me. People don't. That I think most entrepreneurs kind of have that internal like struggle, and a lot of my emotions were connected to, I've done this for 4 years, this is who I am, and now it's all going away, and now everyone was right that knew I wasn't good enough. And I don't know if anyone's actually ever thought I wasn't good enough, but I like to I think it's very easy in your head to be like, oh, they don't think I'm good enough, or they don't think I can do this, well, let me show them, type of thing. And I think a lot of that failure was attached to like my ego, and oh, people won't know, people will think I'm a loser or whatever. My kids will struggle, because I have 4 kids and I'm married. And going through this, I have this big thing where I always want my kids to play a sport every season. Every season, they don't need to play year round. Like one sport, they don't need to be like a superstar. It's just they need to be active. They need to be out of the house. They need to be learning. And during this, like, basketball season was coming up, and we couldn't pay for basketball season, so my kids couldn't play basketball that year, and it like crushed. Of all the things that went on, that crushed me more than anything, because like my sons love. I have 3 boys and a daughter, and my 3 boys love basketball season. That's like one of their favorite times of the year, is to be on a basketball team, and we couldn't do that, and it crushed me. And it was embarrassing as a dad, to feel that failure, to have your kids be like, oh, we just don't have money to do that. They're having to carry that around with them. And I think that those, like, that failure, was interesting though, is you're like, oh man, everyone's gonna hate me, everyone's gonna know I suck. But then you fail and you get on the other side of it, and you're like, nah, it's not that bad. Like, yeah, my kids couldn't play basketball, we still wouldn't play basketball together, as a family. We played a lot of basketball together. And Christmas wasn't great that year, but we had fun, and we still had
Mhm.
good times. And it's like, okay, this is the when you're in it, it sucks. Like, I'm not trying to diminish how terrible it was, and like the rough nights and the tough conversations with my wife. But when you get to the other side of it, you're like, man, it wasn't so bad. If we failed
It's
again,
only
like,
for
we've
a
done that.
season.
Yeah. And it's like, we can do that. We did that. It's not that bad. So
That is very, very inspiring. I know that that's one of the things that we're doing here, and that story it resonates. And there's a lot of people out there that are going or have gone through certain things or will in the future. So you really need to prepare
yeah,
yourself not for the negatives that are going to come, right?
yeah,
But to prepare
yeah,
that mindset.
yeah. So there's a guy, one of my mentors here, and we were talking, and I think a lot of times when you get entrepreneurship, you're like, oh, I'm going to be Phil Knight, or I'm going to be um, Bill Gates, or whoever, Steve Jobs. And a lot of what we look at is like, oh, look where they're at now. So I'm gonna start this company, and it's gonna be Nike, or I'm gonna do this, and it's gonna take me wherever. And entrepreneurs don't really view their career as an entrepreneur as, I might do this for 3 or 4 years, and then I'll probably do a different thing. And there's like building blocks, and you can kind of see this in most successful entrepreneurs have building blocks in their lives that lead up to their first success. Not everyone steps the home plate and hits a home run first time. A lot of people strike out, and they strike out in glorious fashion. Like their failures are just like very like painful to read about. But when you like have a failure with like, mine wasn't on the level of a lot of entrepreneurs, you begin to realize like, yeah, being an entrepreneur sucks. Like if you're gonna do this, like it really sucks. But it's not, but like the only way you can be like committed to continually to get into like the suckiness is where you're just like, this is the only thing I can know. This is the only thing I'll be able to do. And so it's like that commitment to it just kind of carries you through.
Making decisions in life, as we all know, it's if you make the decision in the morning and you say, I will have a good day or I will
Yeah.
have a bad day. It's interesting how that one simple decision that you make can transform your entire world.
Oh yeah.
What are some of the decisions that you make daily in your non-negotiable self-talk that really, like I said, continues to propel you where you're at today?
I think so. That's a good question. So I'm a very intense individual, I think, just by nature, and I have a different way of and I don't really know where this came from. I don't think like I didn't grow up like my parents didn't grow up playing sports. So it's not like it was something where we were like always playing sports, but I have like a very competitive, intense nature. Um and I remember so my wife about a little over 4 years ago had really serious health problems. It was in the middle of when I was running my company. She had a heart attack and quadruple bypass surgery. Um, Almost died. Should have died, according to her doctor. And so I was working from home and just spent. I basically spent like 4 or 5 months at home helping. And my wife around noon every day would be like, I'm just done. I gotta go lay down. And I was like, all right, you're done. Go lay down. I'm gonna step in. I'm gonna help with the kids, whatever needs to be done, make dinner, do all laundry, clean the house, all that stuff. And so I was trying to run this company full time and doing that. And I ended up spending like almost 4 months just at home, really. And we really didn't go anywhere because it was during like cold, during the winter. So my wife couldn't get sick because she just had, open heart surgery, and there's all these complications with it. And I remember one of the first days I went back to my office, I pulled up into the parking spot, and I sat there and I said, and the first thought I had was like, oh no, I don't want to see anybody. Like I was afraid, like all of a sudden I was afraid to talk to people. And I've never had that feeling before in my life. And my first thought was, well, I better go find like 10 people to talk to and get out of this, because I don't know what this is. I've never. And so I just got out of the car and I just went and found people and was like, hey, how's it going? Haven't seen you in a while. And just kept it moving. And I feel like one of the things for me is whenever I feel like, oh, I'm uncomfortable with this, I'm like, I better do this like 20 times so I'm not uncomfortable with it. And that's just kind of, that's not something I even think about. I don't consciously think through like, oh, I need to do something uncomfortable or I need to stretch myself. My mind just goes, if I feel uncomfortable, my mind is like, well, I better do that 10 times. Like I'm not comfortable talking to people I don't know. Well, let me go to every networking event I can. And my mind just goes to that. I don't have to like think through it. It's just like I'm constantly trying to push myself out of my own comfort zone and try to improve and grow. That was a long
The
answer, but
challenger in you. It's the
yeah,
challenger in you.
yeah,
So
yeah,
many
that,
people out there. We want to inspire them to really create the Joseph May challenger in you. Let's coin the phrase, right? But
yeah,
man, there's many people out there and they need that sense of, listen, I'm coming up against adversity, but let me
yeah,
push even harder through that adversity
yeah,
to
yeah,
create almost this habit to where every time that you come up against something that's a
yeah,
failure, you use that failure as fuel.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, I think, and
Well,
I
man,
don't even know where that came from. That just is something that has come out like as I've done this, I've noticed where it's like, oh, I don't like this, and I'll end up just like doing it. So unless
well,
it's
it's the
finance stuff, I don't do
overcoming
anything
attitude,
finance.
right? I mean, it
Yeah,
seems that you've experienced some really traumatic experiences, right, with even your family and then
yeah,
also in business. But really, that will propel and continues to propel you forward in a totally different manner, right? With this very
yeah,
motivated, ambitious, but then also this understanding and respect for life, right? And respect for what business is and what can happen in business. And that's what I'm noticing here. And it's inspiring.
yeah. Well, thank you, thank you. It's I don't know. It's not inspiring when you're going through it.
No, it's not. And I have my own story, so I'm sure there's
Yeah,
things that we can connect on and we'll talk about later. And really,
yeah,
what that brings us to right now is this has been part one of the Founders
yeah.
Odyssey podcast with Joe May. And once again, we just want to thank you so much out there for coming in, hear a little bit of the backstory with Joe, because we know that there's way more to Joe than just the failures and the companies that have gone awry, and because he has so much more to offer and he is also already offering it now. So we're excited to hear that on our part two. So if you guys are out there and you want to know more, well, then you're going to have to stay tuned for part two with Joe on the Founders Odyssey podcast. Anything more that you'd like to say?
No, thanks for having me.
All right, guys. Well, stay in touch. If you like what you're hearing, feel free to subscribe and share with your friends. This has been the Founders Odyssey podcast. Stay tuned.